Hidden History of Workplace Resistance. I'm Tracy McMaster from OPSU. I'm the Greater Toronto Area Council President, and I'm honored to be here up on the stage with these folks, so thank you very much. Everyone knows Sam Gindin here from the G2WA and the past director of the CAW research arm. And so, welcome Sam, he's going to give us some context. And we also want to recognize Greg Shotwell, 30 years at General Motors. I believe a machine operator turned rebel. He's going to talk to us today about what's happening there. And I should make a quick pitch for his book, Autoworkers Under the Gun. Please have a look at it. There it is.
These are $17, but I'm selling it for the solidarity price of 12 Canadian dollars. I don't.
Great deal.
Yeah. Fabulous deal.
This is a poem that was dedicated to Jerry Tucker. These are free. Please take one. But, you know, if you have an extra buck, if you throw it into that box, whatever we collect will go to the Toronto Workers Assembly to maintain support.
Fantastic. And also, before we start, I'd like to give a special thank you to Ernie and Jess for making this event happening by covering travel expenses and accommodation. So thank you very much for all of you for coming.
Welcome everybody, and especially the people who came in from out of town, and some more people coming from out of town who are stuck in traffic. I'm going to be fairly brief, so we can turn it over to our guests from the U.S. And also, we thought afterwards we'd go to a nearby pub afterwards, so anybody who wants to hang around, that would be terrific. Since the 30s. Auto workers were symbols of working class power and also the promises of American capitalism. That lasted for a little over 4 decades. Today, a two-tier, somebody who's hired on as a two-tier worker is getting a lower wage in real terms than somebody who entered the industry half a century ago. When the concessions started at the end of the 70s and the companies were asking for wage restraint and lower wages, that was a tactic. That wasn't their goal. Their goal was what David Sobel's called more cultural. It was to break the spirit of the workers. It was to break expectations. It was to convince workers that their strength didn't lie in solidarity. It didn't lie in getting the class together. It lay in strength, in their success lay in strengthening the companies. But that's what they had to depend on. And that was crucial. And it defeated the auto workers. And the impact of defeating the auto workers was that they could restructure the industry, basically. Okay, I can use the mic now.
That's better.
Okay. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Once they were able to convince workers through the demands on wages that their success depended on the companies, that changed everything. What it meant was that they had a free hand to restructure the workplace in terms of technology, in terms of work organization, and in terms of workload. That way, the productivity improvements that they got from that and the ability to actually lay off lots of workers instead of just getting the benefits from some minor wage concessions meant an enormous saving. It meant that they could start moving towards outsourcing, because the danger of outsourcing was always that when you outsource, you gave workers a lot of power to shut down everything by closing some of that outsourced work. If you could socialize workers into thinking that they didn't actually have the power or they didn't want to use the power, then outsourcing became important. It wasn't just a question of technology making outsourcing important. It was a question of breaking the power of the working class. Another implication of this was that the unionization of the Japanese plants depended very much on organizing workers around working conditions, around dignity in the workplace. But the union was giving up its working conditions to try to maintain its wages. And what that meant was that it was undermining the potential of the union to actually organize those plants, because the key was the question of the workplace. And the same was true in the outsourced plants. When I started working for the auto workers, 80% of the parts industry was unionized. Today it's under 20%. There wasn't a reason to have a union, and that was the problem in the non-union plants. It also meant that they could get rid of double sourcing. The companies used to always make sure that they didn't leave themselves vulnerable by producing things in just one plant. They'd produce, if it was an assembly plant, they'd produce, if it was produced in St. Therese, it would also be produced in California, so they weren't vulnerable to wildcats or to strikes. That was a big expense in terms of capital equipment. Again, once they broke the spirit of workers, once they didn't have to worry about those strikes, they could move to concentrating the facilities into one place. It was rare to have operations in those days that were more than 2 shifts. Now it's common to have 3 shifts. Now it's common to have workers working 10 hours a day, and again, saving on the wages and benefits of more workers. So what happened through that concessions period was that by making concessions, workers were essentially admitting that they were the problem. That was the message up there. When workers made concessions in response to how do you get job security, that was the message. And the other message was that you didn't have to look for alternatives. This was the alternative. This was the answer to how we're going to get some job security. So there's 2 questions I want to raise as I turn it over to our guests. One is to try to understand how deep this defeat was. Now that the industry is making profits again, can we expect workers to start resisting again? Or is this really something that's not going to change for an awfully long time? And if there is leadership in the American labor movement, is it shifting to other sectors? And I think that's one thing that's crucial to ask. The other question is the dilemma of the relationship between workplace strength and broader class strength. It always struck me that if workers weren't confident that they could fight back in the workplace, if they didn't have that confidence that collective action mattered in the workplace, it was hard to convince them that bigger things could be changed. Now the dilemma is, can you really fight in the workplace given the larger context? Or do we have to think about how we change that larger context simultaneously? And that question of the larger context has always been linked to the existence of a left. And the reality today is that the left isn't as much of a crisis as the labor movement. So with that, I'll turn it over to, who's next? Scott, you're going to start?
Also Sean Crawford, whose great-grandfather was the vice chair of the Flint sit-down strike. And great-grandmother and great-aunt were part of the Women's Emergency Brigade. So Sean was hired on as a lower second-tier worker at GM. He's going to talk about those experiences.
How y'all doing today? I'm happy to be here. Y'all have a really hospitable city, and it's gorgeous. I mean, I'm from Flint, Michigan originally. I live there now. Was born and raised, and wow, what a breath of fresh air. I love being here in Toronto, so thank you all for having me. Like she mentioned earlier, my great-grandfather was the vice chair of the Flint sit-down strike. I grew up in a really strong and proud labor family. My great-aunt and grandma were both part of the Emergency Women's Brigade, and they were just, wonderful women. They brought me up as pretty much a labor activist. My first exposure to politics was when I was my grandma used to say to me, and she didn't swear often, but when she saw Republicans on TV, she would swear. She'd be like, "Those goddamn Republicans don't give a shit about the working man." And I was like, "Grandma, what's a Republican?" and shortly thereafter, I learned, and it's kind of history ever since. Originally, my first job out of college was actually as a union organizer through the SEIU. Which I was fired from the SEIU actually for trying to organize a staff union. So I tend to get myself in trouble a lot. It's kind of a habit of mine. And then back in 2008, I was hired in and worked until was it February of 2009. I was laid off for 2 whole years. But in any event, we were laid off for about 2 years in 2009 during the Great Recession. There was a lot of fear. We were worried that our plant would never open back up down in Lake Orion. And the idea was, well, if you don't take concessions, you'll never get these jobs back again. So not only did we, this kind of came in the wake of the two-tier contracts, not only had we accepted the two-tier contracts with, barely any kind of health care, absolutely no pensions. I mean, you could only go to the doctor 5 times a year under the two-tier contract. So, that's for your whole family. And that was the initial contract. Like, really? Really? So in any event, they decided on something called the Compact Operating Agreement, the COA as we call it, where they would bring us back to work, but we had a 40% Tier 2 and 60% Tier 1 ratio, right? So it's split pretty much down the middle. But that's not even to mention the fact that we have third-party people here which effectively function as a third tier in our plant, right? So we couldn't get enough cheap labor. We have people in there sequencing our parts that actually make less than 2 tiers, right? And initially, before they had their contracts, we had non-union labor working in our plant actually for quite a while. And before they had their contract, they were walking around wearing orange vests. Look at me, I'm non-union, I have an orange vest on just for management to pick on. I mean, how freaking ridiculous is that? So often you hear people talk about in the US, Tier 2s make half the wage. That's not entirely accurate. Under the new contract in 2011, we top out at $19.21, which is about $9 less an hour. So it's about 2/3, but it's still too damn low, obviously, and we don't get any kind of pension or anything like that. So one of the kind of catchphrases you hear coming out of corporate America nowadays is the idea of ultra lean production. You all familiar with that phrase? I mean, what does that really mean? To me, that means the fact that we get fewer bathroom breaks, we have fewer people to do repairs, the jobs are overcycled. I mean, the jobs are pretty much set up in such a way to where you don't even have like a split second to do anything. I mean, you'll have to bust your ass for about 4 or 5 jobs before you get to a point to where you can actually like take a drink of water or pick your nose or whatever the freaking case may be. I mean, it's ridiculous. They're scientific about it, trying to extract as much value out of your labor as possible. We actually have more medical leaves in our plant than any other General Motors facility. And I believe in large part that is due to the fact that we have this lean manufacturing system, which is actually being adopted all over in all sorts of industries, including the American healthcare industry. Let's see. So and of course, you guys are probably all familiar with this if you've worked in the auto industry. It's hugely bureaucratic. You come in, you're pretty much just a number. They could give a shit about you. I mean, I asked my boss initially, could I get a day off because I'm trying to go to Toronto for some friends? No. Can I get a half day off? No. I mean, it doesn't matter about my personal circumstances or what I want to do. I got to take the write-up. You're not a human being. You're a number. You're there for production, period. And quite frankly, I was something they called a ARO. It was an absentee replacement operator. And what you do as an ARO, whenever someone's absent, it's kind of self-explanatory. You replace them. So I had to bounce around and learn all these different jobs in trim shop. And so I got a feel for all the different jobs in every place in the entire department, basically. And it's hard on your body. I'm 31 years old, and there were times where I'd come home and my hands would be locked like this. Like I wouldn't be able to move them for like a week. Just because some random job they threw me on, they wear on you. You feel old fast. But despite all those cons, we still have fairly decent job security through the UAW. I can talk to my boss as an equal. You have to fight for that. You have to be assertive and write down and make sure you're backing yourself up, but they can't just arbitrarily fire you. So that's one thing I love about being a union worker. And it is a living wage. Even though we're not making the same, it's still a living wage. And for a guy like myself living in Flint, I'm one of the lucky ones, as crappy as that is. Why are these jobs even still desirable? I mean, you have to understand, Southeast Michigan, I don't know how the economic situation is working here in Canada, but in Southeast Michigan, it's just like poverty. Everyone's leaving. There are no jobs. There are no opportunities. Like Flint, I was just telling Chris, it was built as a town for 300,000 people. We have 90,000 people. So you can imagine what the infrastructure looks like, what the housing situation looks like. Everything's abandoned. Scott visited my home. He picked me up on the way through Flint from Chicago. I have a halfway decent house. You could probably buy my house for $14,000. You know, seriously. You know, that's how bad it is. No one wants to live there because there are no jobs. And pretty much everyone who stays there, either they're in the auto industry, the service sector, or they're just black market. You know what I mean? Just doing whatever they have to survive. So I'm sure y'all are familiar with the idea of the definition of insanity. Like, you do the same thing over and over again expecting different results. I think that's kind of the situation that we're in right now with these concessions, right? We keep on thinking that if we keep giving more and more of our livelihoods away, we're going to get all these jobs back and kind of be, you know, corporate America will have mercy on us, right? Well, that's not the case, obviously. We keep giving back these concessions and they keep screwing us, and it's never going to stop because, as you know, capitalists can never have enough money. So the working class is obviously really angry and upset, but what are the obstacles that we're facing? You know, what do we have to overcome to actually manifest this anger into something productive? I wore this jacket actually kind of as a joke. If you guys can see it, it says Team GM. It says UAW and General Motors side by side, hand in hand, working together, right? What a bunch of bullshit. I mean, like, we have the same interest, right? I mean, their interest is to exploit us as much as possible, to make as much money as possible for themselves. And that's it. That's not a partner, that's not a team, that's the relationship of an exploiter, you know? So we have this team concept that we have to combat. Also, specifically with the union, we have the idea of kind of like representational unionism, where I'm just going to call my union rep and they'll represent me, as opposed to talking to your coworkers and people having like actual real solidarity that's tangible on the plant floor, sticking up for one another against the boss, which is actually what a union is really supposed to be, is just a group of workers coming together to help one another out, right? You don't have to call out your lawyer every time, you know, you get into a little scuffle on the street. You and your boys help each other out to get over whatever instance may occur. And there is a huge lack of class consciousness. You know, we have this kind of like myth in America, and I believe in most of Western culture, like this, where you're a self-made man, you know? I did this all by myself. That's why I'm so successful, not realizing that you drove here on public roads and are using public power lines and in your public health care, whatever. We are we're like the most intensely social species in the world, you know? Let's see here. Also, the idea that greed is a virtue that capitalism seems to enshrine. You know, like, if you're if you're successful and you've done it by any means necessary, you're still a good person. You deserve that. Greed is a virtue. No, that's immoral. That's ridiculous, and that's something that's really systemic in our culture that I think we have to fight. And I can't remember the woman's name that I was speaking with before the conference, but she was talking about when you didn't give in to concessions, they closed the plant. And that's the real fear that they strike into the heart of all workers. It's like economic terrorism. If you don't give in, we'll take away your entire community's livelihood. And that's real, you know, because we can talk and talk about like all these things that we want to fight against, but how do we combat that threat of them destroying our entire community because we don't give them everything they want? Now, that's a real threat. You know, I mean, I've seen it happen in my own community. And the answer that I have in my mind, what keeps just coming up over and over again, is a real international global solidarity. If you go and they switch, they take scab labor somewhere else or concessionary contracts somewhere else, how do you follow them there and make sure that they can strike there? So they can't just run away, right? Because the reason that we were so successful initially as a labor movement was because everything was conglomerated in one small area, and we could organize in that one small area, right? We knew one another. We could have faith in one another because there was this face-to-face trusting contact. But now we have to go all over the globe and follow the companies all over the globe to try to achieve that same sense of solidarity. But there's no other way that we can win because, I mean, capital is global, right? But labor is nationalistic. And that's one of the things that I see all the time in the UAW, you know, proud to be an American and all this flag waving, but they don't realize that we're supposed to be an international working class, which is one of the reasons that I'm really psyched that I'm here. Thank you again for inviting me. Solutions, you know, we need solutions, and I'm just going to kind of run by you guys some of the things that I've been coming up with. Again, social nature of production. We have to recognize that when you look down an assembly line, when I look down my assembly line, it's not just one man building the whole car. It's not like one superhero, right? It's a whole team of thousands and thousands of people, and people in the part supplier plants and shipping and receiving and everything coming together to make this one product. There's a social nature to labor, and we have to recognize that. And once we recognize that no man is an island and we need one another to create a better society and to create these products, we can get over that mythology that's holding us back, that we're atomized. Clearly, we're the ones who make the wealth, you know. Also, maybe to redefine unions and what it means to be a union, not just that representational model, but an actual organic entity where we're interacting with one another on the shop floor to take control of production. And what does that mean? How can we accomplish that? And even further, like one of the things that really excited me about the Occupy movement, and I bet this is pretty obvious to the most of you, and I'm just going to say it anyway, the 99%, what does that really mean? You know, we are the 99%. To me, that means class consciousness. We are a class. You know, we are the vast majority of people. And when we get over our superficial differences and just recognize what we are as a class, that we have the same economic interests, and we have to recognize this in order to move on and create a better quality of life, nothing will be able to stop us. But what can we do? What do we have to do to get over these individual differences to actually get to the point to where we can recognize as the 99%? Because, I mean, quite frankly, occupying parks, it's pretty innocuous. You're not going to accomplish very much. But if you actually take the ideals of occupation and the ideals of 99% and apply that to your workplace, take that into the heart of the beast, to the heart of capitalism, they're screwed. What do we have to do to get these people who held on to these ideals and take them to where it will actually matter, where we're interacting with capital, right? We have to do it. I mean, it can happen. Anything that has been done in the past, but like we kind of like fantasize about labor leaders and things that happen. I mean, the old left, you know what I mean? What we accomplished back in the day. They were just men like us, right? We can do this. Men and women, we can do this. There's no difference. Maybe a quick little plug and then I'm done. One of the things that I've been doing in my plant, the UAW has been promoting something called Solidarity Wednesdays. The idea of wearing red every Wednesday to show support for union causes all over the country to fight back against the right to work and all over the globe, right? And I said, well, if they're going to do it for other people's union causes, let's do it for ours. So I made up this little shirt that says, "No more tears." Solidarity. So, you know, every Wednesday, if you're in the right spot, you'll see a flood of red coming in your workplace. So, thanks, everybody.